It's been just about 2 years since the RodeCaster Pro 2 was launched and the RodeCaster Duo about a year ago, and they still remain two of my favorite pieces of equipment in my studio. It's also one of the pieces of equipment that I get the most questions about, either online in forums like this or in the Take One Tech Academy, or indeed for coaching calls. In fact, I would say the majority of the consultations that people book with me are generally to do with, if not RodeCaster directly, then usually audio. So I thought it'd be useful to just have a general open RodeCaster Q&A. So if you have got any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. If you're watching on the replay, then the best place to get your questions answered is over in the Discord. So you can find a link to that down in the description. As always, I have got a list of questions that have come up recently. There's never any shortage of them. So I'll start off with a few of those. And then, as I say, feel free to drop any questions that you've got in the chat as we go along. So first of all, which one should you choose? This is a question I get all the time about the RodeCaster Pro 2 and the RodeCaster Duo. I should say that I am using right now the RodeCaster Pro 2. I absolutely love it. But when they brought out the RodeCaster Duo, which happens to be now a little lighting feature on my back wall there, I felt like that was something that had been really made for me in terms of it did absolutely everything that I needed it to do, because I was only using one primary microphone, which is this one, and then sometimes a wireless mic. So that enabled me to connect a wireless mic. But it still had all of the pro features. So if you are using or looking for an audio interface to do things like advanced audio routing in your Zoom calls, in your meetings, which is really where I'm coming to for all this. Obviously, I talk about it in terms of content creation on YouTube and in general, but actually the primary use I have for this is in meetings online and in Zoom calls and things like that, webinars and the like. So that is my sort of primary use case. And there is a bit of a misnomer, really, I think, with the RodeCaster Duo, because it is every bit, in my mind, as much of a pro device as the RodeCaster Pro 2, because it still has all of those advanced audio routing functions that the RodeCaster Pro 2 has. It's just only got two microphone inputs, although actually it's also got a headset input on the front, which the RodeCaster Pro 2 does not have. But aside from that, all of the advanced audio processing, the routing, and everything is exactly the same in terms of the internals of it. So I do think that they're every bit as much pro. It could almost have been called the RodeCaster Pro Mini, but obviously getting a bit complicated and long-winded to say that. So if you are thinking of getting a RodeCaster Pro, or getting a RodeCaster, I should say, and deciding between the Pro 2 versus the Duo, the question that you really want to ask is, how many microphones are you likely to want to have plugged into it simultaneously? And incidentally, having said that the RodeCaster Duo, I felt like it was just made for me. Why did I switch back to the RodeCaster Pro 2? Well, it was when I added an additional microphone into my studio. So I have got another mic, which is over here, just out of the way, for another sort of scene that I've got set up for some other content that I'll be creating. I feel like I've been saying that for a few months. I haven't actually started it yet, but there you go. And so now I've got two dynamic mics, two XLR mics, I should say, plugged into the RodeCaster Pro 2, but also I've got an extra channel then that I can use for the wireless mic as well, which pair directly with it as well. So that's really the main differentiator. So if you are just maybe a solo content creator in your studio and you're not going to be doing, four-way podcasting with four different people in the room at the same time, then really the RodeCaster Duo is, as I say, every bit as much a pro device. So don't let the name sort of sway you with that. So that is one of the most common questions that I get asked all the time, though, is trying to decide which one to go for. I mentioned about them being, really pro devices and having a lot of audio routing capabilities. So the other question that I get asked all the time is about the different channels in terms of the USB channels that you have going into the computer, because this is something that sets it apart from some of the other mixers that are around, which is that there are three separate USB channels that you can assign in your computer. And actually this is taken in over two separate USB cables, and that gives you the ability to do one of two things. Either connect two separate computers to the same device and then allow the audio to route back and forth between them, or you can just simply connect both of those USB cables into the same computer, and that then gives you 3 separate channels. So why might you want to do that? Well, for example, if I just sort of explain my setup that I've got at the moment, I've got my RodeCaster Pro 2, obviously, and then the first channel is feeding into Ecam Live and vice versa, coming back from Ecam Live. So audio from Ecam, which is my live production software, is coming into the RodeCaster on one of those channels. I also have my system audio then coming into the RodeCaster as well, and then applications like Zoom, Microsoft Teams, Google Meet can be on a separate channel. And so what that means is that you've got basically traffic, audio traffic going in and out of your communication application, audio going back and forth between your system and something like Ecam Live or OBS or whatever you're using. But the RodeCaster is acting as basically the audio hub, allowing you to decide what goes where. For example, right now on this particular live stream, I'm streaming via Ecam Live. So my audio from my microphone is going into the RodeCaster, going into Ecam Live, and then going out to YouTube. But I'm also streaming right now into Discord, into my Discord back channel. And so I've got the audio from Discord coming into the RodeCaster, and I can hear it, but it's not being passed through into the live stream. So that's just one example that I'm actually doing right now, whereby the RodeCaster is handling all of that audio routing. So this brings me on to another common question, which is, when you've got these 3 different USB channels into the computer, you've got one of them that is called the main stereo channel. And if you're on a RodeCaster Pro 2, it will show up on your system as RodeCaster Pro 2 main stereo. There is also RodeCaster Pro 2 chat. Both of these channels come over on the first USB cable. So I mentioned that there was 2 USB cables that you can plug into the same computer if you wish. Well, they are basically both on that same channel. On that same USB input. There is also then a second USB channel, cable rather, which has a third USB channel called RodeCaster Pro 2 secondary. Now on the Duo, it's basically exactly the same naming convention, but it would be RodeCaster Duo, main stereo, RodeCaster Duo, secondary, and RodeCaster Duo chat. So the question that comes up often is, what is the difference then between these different channels, and which one should you use for which? And I actually think that Rode probably made a slight naming error here, because it doesn't really need to be called a chat channel. It could be used for absolutely anything that you want. In the initial iteration of the firmware, when it was first released, there was a slight difference between these channels, whereas really now there is only one main difference between the 3 channels, and that is that the channel that is called main can actually be either a stereo channel. I keep calling it main stereo because that's the way that I have it set up. But you can also have it so that it sends the multi-track feed down that channel as well. Now, why you may want to use that is, I've already mentioned that the RodeCaster is a hub. So if you think of it as all of the audio is coming into the RodeCaster, and generally what you're going to be doing is you're going to be mixing that on the with the faders here, and you're going to be sending that out as a single combined stereo signal. So that's what's happening right now, is all of these different faders, these different settings that I've got, that is all being sent into Ecam Live and is being streamed out to YouTube. But what you may want to do is, if you've got some sort of music software or audio software, you may want to have all of those individual channels going in individually into your audio software if you're going to do any post-processing or mixing or things like that in your own software. And so for that, you would want to, rather than have a stereo mix of all of the inputs as you've set them, just going down that channel, then you would have the multi-track setting, which would then allow you to send individual tracks for the microphone. Maybe if you've got 3 mics set up, then it would send individual channels of those down to the multi-track channel. So that is really the main key difference, and that is only available on that first channel, so the main channel. But apart from that, everything else is the same. You still have the ability to turn on mix minus. Just to clarify what that is, mix minus means that when you have got for example, a communication app like Zoom, I've mentioned that the RodeCaster acts like a hub, so obviously audio is coming in from Zoom into your RodeCaster. Well, if you didn't use mix minus, what would happen is the audio coming into the RodeCaster would get mixed in with everything else, and then you're sending it basically straight back to Zoom because you're wanting the people in Zoom to hear your microphone, for example. So what Mix Minus does is it says that anything that has come in on this particular channel, like the RodeCaster Pro 2 chat channel, for example, let's just remove that from the kind of return feed back down that channel. And so that then means that the people in Zoom are not basically hearing themselves back. They're not hearing the audio going into the RodeCaster and coming straight back again. So that's something that is available on all channels. The Mix Minus, having that turned on the main, the secondary, and the chat channel is something you can do on all of them. So really, apart from that, then the naming of them is largely irrelevant, because I think that the vast majority of users are not really going to be using the multi-track feature in any case. Generally, you're just going to want the regular stereo feed. So from that perspective, yeah, there is no difference, and you can basically choose whichever one you want. So I think people sometimes get hung up on the names of them and worried, can I use chat if it's for Zoom or for my system audio or whatever? But really, you can pretty much use whichever one you want for anything. So in terms of the other things that you can do with routing, one of the things that I do with this, they did introduce some advanced audio routing options in a firmware update about 12 months ago, something like that, which basically means that rather than just Mix Minus, so if you think about Mix Minus being that anything that's coming in on that channel is being removed from the the feed going out. Well, with the custom audio routing, you can basically eliminate anything you want from any of the other channels. This is probably easier if I just sort of show you this in terms of a routing table. Now, I've already done a full walkthrough of the audio routing on RodeCaster, so I'm not going to go through that completely, but it is worth just mentioning this. So if I come into my presentation software here, I've got this little handy diagram, and this is what I call my little routing table, and this shows you basically the channels that you've got. And one thing that catches people out as well is the difference between inputs and outputs. So the fact that something can be both an input and an output. So if you look here, we've got our inputs down this side and we've got our outputs along the top there. Well, obviously a microphone is just simply an input. So these ones here are just purely inputs. They're something that's going into the RodeCaster into the mix. Then you've got those USB channels. So main here, the chat, and then the secondary, and then there's also Bluetooth. There's some others as well, but I'll just keep it simple for the time being. So those can act as inputs, but you'll notice that they also feature along the top, because as well as being an input, stuff can come into the RodeCaster over USB. It can also go back out over USB as well. So that's why these things are appearing as both inputs and outputs. Whereas something like the headphones, obviously that is just simply an output. You're not getting anything in via the headphones. With the exception of, on the RodeCaster Duo in particular, that does in fact have a headset setting on it, or a headset socket, I should say, on the front of it. So therefore, it can act as an input, in which case it's the microphone component of the headphones that is the input, whereas you've also got it as an output as well, where your audio is going out to those headphones as well. But in terms of the audio routing then, basically a Mix Minus setup is going to be basically doing something like this, where you say that, okay, on the main channel, for example, we want to exclude the main as an input from the return feed as an output, if that makes sense. If you want to just take a slice down any one of these, basically what this chart is saying is, let's say you were listening on headphone socket 1. This means that you can hear all of these different channels. Whereas this channel here, because we don't want Ecam Live, in my case, my production software, feeding back into itself, Ecam Live is only receiving the microphone inputs from the headset as well, but it's not getting the feedback from itself, and it is getting the feed from Zoom, Discord, and potentially Bluetooth from the phone as well. So that's just showing what this routing table sort of represents. But what you can also do then is you can also, with this advanced audio routing, you could potentially, or custom audio routing, you can potentially maybe eliminate some other things. So you may want, for example, the Discord. I may want to exclude that also from my production. And so what I can do is I can have that so that it is completely excluded from everything. And so the way that I do this is in the RodeCaster. you would just go into the settings up here, go into the outputs, go into the routing, whichever way you particularly say it in your area of the world. And then you can just click on the USB 1 here. I tell you what I'm going to do. I'll do it on Bluetooth so it doesn't actually affect the stream. But the way that I have these set up is basically all on mix minus. But you do have the option then to go into custom. And here you can basically select what you want to include in that mix. So I could say that maybe I don't want my my microphone, for example, going into the Bluetooth. So I could just attach that and mute it like that. So now you can see that that is now grayed out. That means that the microphone audio from this mic that I'm using right here is not going through to the Bluetooth channel. I could also replicate the mix minus part of it by also excluding the Bluetooth. That means that any audio coming in via Bluetooth is not then going back out again as well. And you could also do things, not just eliminating things completely, but you may want to adjust some of the levels of those. So at the moment you can see that these things have all got this little link symbol. Maybe you can't quite see it, I'm not sure about the resolution, but basically these have all got this little link symbol here, which means that as I raise and lower these faders here, it is also raising and lowering the fader on there as well. Well, what I can do is I can actually detach that. So if I wanted to say, right, well, this particular microphone here, maybe this is going to be used for some sort of back channel or something like that. Maybe we don't want it going into the mix, so I do want it to be down, but maybe actually for the Bluetooth channel, for example, I want that audio from that mic channel here to pass through. Well, if I just press the button there, you can see that's broken that link. And what that means now is I can adjust that independently of the fader. So this means that for just this channel only, the Bluetooth channel, this microphone, for example, would be feeding through into it. So it gives you lots of scope for doing some really sort of custom audio routing into all of these different channels. Now, having said that, I personally still do not use this this method, and the reason is because unless you're really on top of what all these different levels are, if you're setting different levels for the mix into different outputs, then it could potentially get a little bit confusing because you wouldn't necessarily know once you've come out of this. So if you're just basically on your regular home screen, you can see here it still shows that this level is at 0 because that's where the fader is, and unless you're sort of conscious of where that is on the in the mix for your different other outputs, then it would be easy to sort of lose sight of that. The other thing is I'm often wanting to sort of quickly switch between one and the other. So, for example, right now, I've got my Discord. As I say, I can hear what's going on in the Discord. If there was anything going on in there or any noise coming from there, I'd be able to hear that. But you're not hearing that. Now, one of the ways that I could do that is using this custom audio routing. So if I go back to my outputs, routing there, I'm just going to switch this one back to mix minus, but I could just come into, oops, here we go. Let's come back to there. I'll just hopped out of it for a second. What I could do is I could come into my USB 1 mix, I could change that to custom, and I could eliminate my Discord from that. But what I would like to do is be able to quickly and easily switch these things on and off. So the way that I do that is I use these buttons that we've got at the bottom of the RødeCaster. Now, there's two buttons at the bottom of each fader. There is a green one with a picture of an ear, and there is a red one with the familiar symbol of mute on it. And the way that these work are, if you have the green button selected on any one channel, it means that you are listening to that channel as the host. And by the host, I mean you're on the headphone 1 output. So you're listening on your headphones. It's on this primary or headphone 1 channel, I should say. And when you have none of these listen buttons selected, you're hearing the entire mix. But as soon as you press any one of those buttons, you're basically just isolating that. So imagine that you were trying to queue up an audio track or something like that. You would be able to press this button, you're listening to it. It's not necessarily going through into the mix, or maybe it is, but that you're just sort of isolating that track, that channel. Well, if you select multiple of those green listen buttons, you're basically hearing all of the ones that you have selected. So the way that I use this, because I'm not really needing to sort of isolate individual tracks ever really for the way that I use this. I actually just have these green listen buttons on for all channels all of the time. And what that means is it means that I'm hearing everything as I should do, but also at the moment, everything would be going out into the mix, and there is no sort of effect on it for either the listener or for me. But where this becomes helpful is that when you've got the listen button selected, if you also then press the mute button, although the mute button mutes that channel into the mix, that is going out into the broadcast, wherever that happens to be, you as the host are still able to hear it. So what that means is that you can see here, I've got these two channels at the moment are just muted, and that is because I am still able to hear them. I'm on listen, but this one here is my Discord channel. This one here is my Zoom channel. I'm not obviously using that at the moment, but I just leave it just up there. But this means that I can still use the fader to control the volume. So I can turn the volume down of Discord, like while I'm streaming. This is generally what I do. So I have it just lower, so that if there is any sort of background noise in there, I don't hear it loudly, but I can still hear it. But crucially, because I've got the mute button on, it means it's not passing through into the live stream. And so I use this as well in like Zoom workshops, for example, where I want to make sure that everybody is muted, and try as you might, you can have everyone sort of set to mute, but I want to make it easy that they can come off mute if they need to. But during a webinar or a workshop, I should say, generally the way that would work is I'm often delivering some content at the beginning and then having a Q&A a little bit later on. So I want to make sure that the Zoom is muted in the beginning, so that no sort of random sounds of maybe people coming into the meeting or unintentionally unmuting themselves, that doesn't get passed through into my recording software, Ecam Live, which I would use to sort of record the actual formal recording of the workshop. But then it means that when I do want to take questions from the audience, I can basically unmute here, and that then allows the Zoom audio to pass through into Ecam Live. The other thing that I've done, which is I think a useful thing, if you ever find yourself wondering, which fader is which, you can change the colors on these. So I've got orange for Ecam, purple for Discord, and blue for Zoom, just to help me try and remember it, because I do sometimes move these faders around as well, depending on what I'm doing. So that's how I use these mute buttons and listen buttons. The reason why I mention this is because I've talked about this several times before, but I maybe didn't make it clear that, this does actually apply to this headphone one socket. So in the Academy, we have weekly Q&As. This is the Take One Tech Academy. In case you are interested in finding out more, I'll leave a link to that on the screen, and you can find it in the description as well. But in our weekly Q&As, we were talking about this and different solutions for audio routing using RodeCaster, and I mentioned this methodology, but you do need to be using the headphone one socket as opposed to either any of these other three here, or potentially also the monitors. So you've got speakers you've got cables that you can connect at the back to go to speaker monitors, or monitor speakers, and then also you can connect those via Bluetooth as well if you want to as well. So, but just note that these listen buttons here apply purely to this headphone one socket. Otherwise, you just won't hear the difference. So with that said, let me just check in. There's a couple of questions before I get to the rest of my list that I've got here. So, hey, Jim, great to see you here. Thanks for stopping by. This may be too specific. Sorry. Look at that. I think we've just cut off the end of the thing. I should probably read these things before I get to the end. Let me know what your question is, and I'll get to it. Let's have a look. Alec, hello. Great to see you here as well. I have the Duo Rode showing mic function, but PC is not picking up anything. Any suggestions? I'm not quite sure what you mean by that. You have the Duo Rode showing mic function. So the Rode is, but the PC is not picking up anything. I'm not sure what you. Oh, so you mean that you're seeing the audio level on your microphone, perhaps going up. So in the same way that if we take a look at my top-down shot, is this what you mean, that your microphone is registering here, but it's not registering on your computer? Until I find out what that is. If that is the problem you're having, then if your mic is registering here, but it's not showing up on the if it's not showing up in your application, whatever you're using, you would just want to check what channel you have selected and then also come into the routing, go to the outputs, go to the routing here, and just make sure that whatever channel you're on, either the USB 1, the chat, or the USB 2, just make sure that that is not set to. The only one that would cause it not to go through would be if you were on custom mix and had somehow inadvertently, like this, if you gone into custom and inadvertently, like I kind of demonstrated actually with the Bluetooth, if you would inadvertently switch that off, that could potentially eliminate the mic from that. Another thing though that could cause this, which is can often happen, is also with these buttons on the bottom. So if you're not hearing it on your computer, it could well be that you've got the mute button selected, and it's kind of a little bit of a contrast issue here with these buttons, because if you go to the display and then go to brightness, you've got this brightness of the buttons here. Now, specifically, you can see that there's two different tones. There's what brightness they are when they're inactive, and the brightness they are when they're active. So having a bigger contrast between active and inactive, it's not as easy for you to see on the screen here, I appreciate, because it looks a little bit blown out here as I look at it. But if you've got these ones set a little bit closer, like the default is something more like this, so that all the lights look bright and colorful when it's switched on. And I actually quite like this, that I like that these ones are bright. But the problem with that is there's very little contrast then if you use the default setting between these mute buttons at the bottom. And so it's quite easy to see that the thing is muted or not. And I see, so yeah, you're completely correct. You're saying that when mute is selected, the activity monitor will not show on RødeCaster. So that is entirely correct. Yeah. So like the one for Discord, for example, although I can change the level and it shows me the level, you're exactly right. You wouldn't see the green bar bouncing. But it is just worth mentioning that, though, that this is something that I know has caught a lot of people out, is if you've got it set to mute, it's not passing through. So if you're not muted, and indeed, as you say, you are seeing the level bouncing up and down there, then the only thing I can think then is that it's if it's not that and it's not the custom audio routing, then would just be to look at what's going on in your computer, in your PC, to see about any additional routing that you may have in there. I'm not too sure otherwise, because if it is registering here, you could always try, and maybe you've tried this, but try one of the other different channels. So rather than, if you were using, for example, the main stereo, then potentially try the chat instead, because that is still on that sort of first USB socket, USB cable connection, or potentially, try the secondary. And also, I should say, is it something that are you hearing it in your monitors as well? I would guess you are. If you're seeing something there, I would guess you are hearing it. But yeah, apart from that, if you're not hearing it in your computer, the other thing then would be, where are you actually taking it into in your computer? So what application, for example, are you using it in? Sometimes you have multiple ways to mute things. This is kind of the problem, is you can mute a microphone here, you can mute a channel on your PC, you could mute it in the particular app. I mean, I've certainly done that myself in Ecam Live, for example, inadvertently being on mute there. So it is a problem that there can be multiple places. But as if it's registering on here, I would guess that the problem is somewhere on the computer side, if you've checked those other things. But give me a bit more info, and we can see if we can find a better answer to that, because that hasn't really given you a decisive thing to check. So I will just say one thing that's not related necessarily, but it's not what you're asking about, I should say, but it is related to audio not coming through. And this is another common thing that I encounter a lot with folks, where we've talked about using RødeCaster for Zoom, and this is something that comes up all the time. Now, what I need to do is actually just open up Zoom so I can get my Zoom settings. One of the questions that comes up, as I say, really quite often, is that they're using RødeCaster, they're using it with Zoom, and also with Teams and other meeting style applications. And one of the reasons why they want to use the RødeCaster is because they want to be able to have their microphone, but then they also want to have the sound effects and things like that being able to be played into their meetings or workshops or whatever it happens to be. So if that's the case, what happens is, the default settings on Zoom have what's called background noise suppression. And the idea is that it's going to remove all of the background noise. The problem is it's actually really, really good, to the point where it is going to remove everything except your voice in the default setting. So if we come over to the Zoom settings here and go into your audio, so in this sidebar, this is, by the way, the Zoom settings in the app. There are desktop settings in the desktop app, but then there's also settings on the web. But this is specifically the ones in app. So if you're on Zoom like this, you would just go to your little Zoom settings, the little cog icon there, and open up this window. And then from here, what you'll see is in the audio profile, the default setting of Zoom is going to be this auto. So Zoom background noise removal will be on, and the default setting is auto. And that is where it's going to remove everything except your voice. And as I say, it does a really good job at isolating your voice and removing, even really high quality audio that you might be playing through using the sound pads on your RodeCaster or whatever it may be, maybe routing some system audio from Spotify or something like that, some music in. So what you want to do is, as a first step, change the background noise suppression to one of these two. I personally have mine set on low because I'm generally in a low noise environment. So here you can see that these different options, high background speech. So that means it's even going to remove background speech if there's people talking. If you're in an office, it's going to isolate just your voice, the one that's sort of predominant on the call. Then you've got medium, where it's going to eliminate computer fan and pen taps and things like that. And this one is going to eliminate faint background sounds as well. So I personally just have it set to this as a default. And what that means is that will allow, any sound effects that I've got on the RodeCaster or that I'm routing any other way, they will come into Zoom. There is actually another step that you can do though, which is this one here, original sound for musicians. And this is where Zoom's basically not going to perform any noise, certainly not any noise cancelling, but also, not going to modify your audio in any way. I say that there is technically a couple of things here. So first of all, I have high fidelity music mode on. Technically, that may be a step too far for just me talking into a Zoom call, but nevertheless, that basically just means it's going to not going to be affecting the audio, since we've got high quality audio coming from the RodeCaster. There's also stereo audio. Generally, what you're putting into a Zoom meeting from your microphone is mono anyway. It's going to be stereo, but in case you are ever, playing music in, I just leave it on. In fact, it will tell you here, this option enables Zoom to encode audio in stereo, and it will use higher CPU usage. But don't be put off by that, because in general, the audio processing is going to pale into insignificance compared to the video that's going on. So I don't worry about that potential, slightly increased CPU load. But one that you may want to still consider having on, which is technically processing, would be this echo cancellation. And the time to use that would be if you are in a situation where you're listening to Zoom over speakers. So I have my in-ear monitors on all the time, whether I'm on a Zoom call or live streaming or recording or whatever. But if you are in a Zoom meeting, then, if you're in meetings all day, I get it that earphones are maybe a little bit uncomfortable to wear all day. So I know lots of people like to be on their Zoom calls using a good mic, but just still have the speakers. So in this case, you can still enable the echo cancellation, and that's going to stop that audio from feeding back into the Zoom. This is something that is different to what we talked about with the mix minus, which they kind of sound the same thing. We're talking about not allowing the audio from Zoom to come into the RodeCaster and then feed back into Zoom. Well, that's talking about the actual routing that's going on within the RodeCaster. This one is specifically related to audio that's basically where the Zoom audio is coming out of your speakers and then potentially feeding back into your microphone and feeding back in that way. So even if you've got mix minus on, if you're using speakers, you would still, external speakers into, for your Zoom calls, you would still want to enable that echo cancellation there as well. Even if you do use this original sound for musicians, I would still recommend you change this one though as well, because one of the things about the original sound for musicians is you do need to enable it in every call as well. So you'll see there's a little thing up in the top left corner. There is a bit of code that you can type in to have it on permanently, but it's a little bit of a workaround. But generally, this will be something that in the meeting, you'll just sort of click on the top left corner when you start the meeting. So by adjusting these settings here, basically, if ever you forget to click on that thing to enable it in the meeting, it will fall back on this setting. And so we want to at least leave this one so that this is still going to allow that audio from RødeCaster to go through. That is a really common audio issue, and it's not really necessarily obvious how to solve it. And the other thing about it, which is a bit frustrating, is unless people know that you are trying to play in some background music, you could probably hear it in your headset, but they are not necessarily going to be able to hear it as participants. So just one to watch out for, that is. So let's get up to speed here. Hey, Jim, I've got the rest of your question now, and I've seen that it's complete, so let's go on. I'm anticipating replacing my Focusrite Scarlett to i2. I guess I'm struggling how you can separate, say, ecam from Zoom. Is there routing running on the Mac also? No, so the way that this is working is there is these different channels. So maybe if I just come back to, I've got a little slide of the back of, this is the RodeCaster Duo, but the RodeCaster Pro 2 is the same. Which one were you thinking of replacing with? If you're just a solo preneur, as it were, or you're just using it just you're not having lots of microphones set up, then the RodeCaster Duo would actually be ideal for this. This is, as I say, why I felt like it was made for me. I use it for Zoom all the time. But let's take a look at the connections that we've got on the back. So I won't go through all of these. I'll just sort of highlight. We've got two mic inputs. Maybe I will go through them all. We've got two mic inputs there, and then we've also got headphones 1 and 2 coming out. This is the Duo. Basically, these two things are the ones that are different on the RodeCaster Pro 2. On the RodeCaster Pro 2, you've basically got 4 headphones and 4 mic inputs. But apart from that, the rest of it is all the same. You've also got a speaker output, so that's a line out left and right for external speakers. As I was just talking about, the idea of having your Zoom coming over speakers. Then you've also, on the Duo, you've also got the option of a headset port on the front. Another little side use for this, by the way, is that although it's a headset, so by that it's something like this. These are the Rode. I haven't actually got the mic thing plugged into it, but you know what a headset is anyway. It's these kind of things. So I haven't got the mic plugged into it at the moment, but it looks like this. So this is the Rode headset, and so here you've got the obviously the earphones and the microphone built in. But you can plug that into the front of the RodeCaster Duo on that little socket just on the front. But actually, another use for this, and the way that I was using this, is you can actually plug, if you've got like a lavalier mic with a 3.5mm jack on it, you can actually plug that directly into the front as long as you've got the right little adapter. And it means that you could potentially have an XLR mic. You could also connect a mic wirelessly if you've got one of the Rode wireless mics, and you could potentially connect a lav mic up to the front of it there as well. But anyway, I digress. The point about this was, or me bringing this up, was you've basically got these 2 USB sockets on the back. One of them, with the number 1 on it, gives you 2 USB channels, USB main stereo, USB chat. And then the second one, the second USB socket, gives you an additional channel. So you can connect either to 2 separate computers. So you would have 2 channels into one computer, and 1 into the other. Or you can connect them all to the same computer, and that gives you basically 3 channels into that computer. Just to sort of round off this, you've also got obviously Bluetooth, so you can connect it up technically to either a phone, so have 2-way, or just 2 Bluetooth speakers. But that is the connection. So to answer your question, which I'm getting to, which was, how do you separate ecam from Zoom? So because we've got those 3 USB channels, they show up on your computer as 3 individual channels. And so what that means is if I come over to my Zoom settings again and show you, you can see here that in this case, I'm using for my speaker RodeCaster Pro 2 secondary and RodeCaster Pro 2 secondary in there as well. So that means that all of the audio from Zoom is coming in on that secondary channel. Meanwhile, if I go over to Ecam Live, I'll just have to move something out of the way here. If I go over to Ecam Live now, I will go into, where shall I do this? I'll do this from here. Let's see if this is going to work. Yeah. So in Ecam, you can probably see, it might be a bit small, but I've got RodeCaster Pro 2 main stereo set as my microphone input. My level's a bit low there. And then I've also got, if I go into my Ecam settings, which are somewhere over here, I've also got under the audio section, I've also got my speaker for ecam set to RødeCaster Pro 2 main stereo. So those are both on separate channels. I've also got then in Discord, if I go over to my Discord and I go to my audio settings in there, where is it? Video and voice and audio. Let's try this. I'll come out of demo mode from ecam. And then let's just pull this up here. So this is now my Discord settings. I'll get the Zoom ones out of the way. So you can see here on Discord, I've got RodeCaster Pro 2 chat for my input and output. So that's how they are assigned to basically separate channels. And if we come back to that routing table that I was talking about, and we will come up to this one. Just play this for you. There we go. I've actually got them the opposite way around here, but it's the same principle. So what that means is that ecam is on its own channel, Zoom's on its own channel, and Discord is on its own channel as well. And because I've got those set to, ecam is main stereo for input and main stereo for output, that means that then I'm utilizing the mix minus on the RodeCaster, so the ecam is not hearing itself, if you want to think of it like that. Meanwhile, it is getting the two microphones, the headset. It's also getting Zoom fed into it, and Discord and Bluetooth on the phone as well. So that is how the routing is working. And then if you want to look at Zoom, for example, Zoom's hearing all of the microphones. It's also hearing any audio that's coming from ecam, and then it's also hearing anything coming from Discord. And as I say, there is that example of where I might want to just exclude certain other things. So exclude Discord, for example. If I'm using that for a back channel, then I can exclude that from those different ones. So it means that all of these different things are feeding into the RodeCaster, but it is only these channels here that are feeding into Zoom, and we've excluded the Zoom so that we don't get slapback, and we've also excluded our back channel, for example. So that would be a way that you could do that routing, and that's how I do it. So hope that answers the question, Jim. And I've explained that well enough. So let's have a look at hello, Stanny. Great to see you. You have a RodeCaster Pro 2, and I don't understand why, when my microphone is off, still picking up sound. Do you know anything about it? I'm not sure what you mean by that. If you mean that when you've got your headphones in, you're still hearing something in your headphones, let's think why that might be. If it's still picking up the microphone, unless you've got your fader up on your on the RodeCaster. So this is my mic channel here. So as I move that down, obviously that reduces the volume of it in my ears. If that is what you mean, let's think why that could be. You certainly shouldn't be hearing your microphone. If you've got your fader all the way down, then you shouldn't be hearing it. So I'm not quite sure what you mean by when the microphone is off. If you mean why when you are not speaking into the microphone, that there is still some noise in your headphones, as in something audible in your headphones, then there will be background noise. And it's certainly one of the things to get used to for me when I started using in-ear monitors for monitoring my audio. It feels totally alien now, actually. It feels kind of weird just to be speaking like this and not be able to hear my voice back. It sounds super strange. But in the beginning, it was odd to be able to hear all the other little sounds and things like that coming in. So I don't know if that's what you mean. I'm not quite sure what you mean by when the microphone is off. So perhaps you can elaborate. I've certainly had instances where there have been so on coaching calls, there is all kinds of different scenarios that I run into with somebody saying that this is their issue, and then we try and drill down into why that is happening. There has been occasions where somebody's maybe had one of the other mics slightly open. If they've got another mic plugged in, if one of those is still slightly up, or maybe the audio is coming from somewhere else, but if you're not seeing the level go up and down like as you're talking here, as mine is, but you're still hearing it, then it must be coming from either somewhere else, if that's all the way down, or I'm just need a little bit more context. I can't quite grasp why that might be at the moment. I'll come back to it if I think, because sometimes when I'm doing these live streams and reading, I'm trying to read and think, and I can't necessarily do the same two things at the same time. Hey, Jamie, great to see you as well. Let me just pop you over here. Currently using a RodeCaster 2 with a Heil PR40. Nice mic. What would be the main advantages of changing to a Duo? If you are happy with the audio and everything you're getting through the RodeCaster, and it's doing everything you want to do, then it's not a case of I'm a big advocate of not having people changing their gear up just because somebody else says, "Oh, this thing's great." The gas is real, so beware of the gear acquisition syndrome. However, one of the things that I don't necessarily think, because most of these other mixers and interfaces don't do this, it would be for me the audio routing. So if you're wanting to do some of that more advanced audio routing, I know that you are an Ecam Live user. So if you're using Ecam Live with Zoom, they've kind of built in some of the routing. One of the main reasons for me using the RodeCaster originally was that we didn't have this sort of two-way audio going on between Ecam Live and Zoom. So we could have a microphone going into Zoom, and we could have all of our Ecam Live goodness with all of the graphics and overlays and things like that, feed that in using the virtual camera into Zoom. But we didn't have a way of bringing the Zoom participants easily back into Ecam without using a piece of third-party software called something loopback. There it is, so that it could route the audio in the background. However, that was something where you kind of like set it up and then you have to leave it like that with doing whatever routing it is. Now with the latest version of Ecam Live that actually has Ecam for Zoom as a Zoom app sort of built in, so that you can launch Zoom meetings from within Ecam itself, that can actually handle the two-way audio. So audio can pass from Ecam into Zoom and Zoom back into Ecam, and you can just pull out participants from Zoom and have them in your presentation, in your production, I should say, and it will pass that audio back through. Even though there is that capability, I personally am still using the RodeCaster because I still do like the control over the audio that gives me with things that I mentioned at the start of the stream, where I can be listening to the Zoom. So if I want to be able to listen to the participants but not have it pass through into Ecam, I want to be able to sort of individually mute channels like that, or maybe just lower or adjust the levels individually. I'm still using the RodeCaster for that. And in fact, it was me who pushed for, when they were running the beta and I did some alpha testing of the Zoom, they were planning on it just being completely handling all of the audio within Ecam. But I said, really, we've got to have the ability to be able to deactivate all of that audio routing that Ecam's doing and allow us just to have control back. So they implemented that feature. So I was very pleased about that. So long answer to your question: if it's all working fine for you and you're getting, the audio is great, that is a great product in itself. The reason why you may want to use a Duo would be, I'm not sure the RodeCaster, if ever, how many inputs that's got in terms of microphones, but if it's just you anyway, that's probably likely not a consideration. But certainly the audio routing would be one of the big ones. I'm also not sure about the RodeCaster in terms of what that gives you from an audio processing point of view. So that's something I haven't really talked about today, but one of the big things about the RodeCaster is the audio processing. So things like the noise gate. Noise gate is something that when you are not passing audio into your microphone, for example, then you can decide how much of the background audio you want to let through. So I have mine set so that when I stop speaking, it goes completely silent. If I was to turn my noise gate off for a second, then you would hear that there is actually constant background noise in my studio, because I've got an air conditioning unit running just up there. So if I turn my noise gate off for a second, maybe you can hear that, maybe you can't, but there is a constant hiss or hum in the background coming from my aircon and the crickets outside here in the north of Thailand in the morning. But if I turn my noise gate back on, then it eliminates that completely. So that is another thing, things like the noise gate, the compressor. If you want to know all about audio processing, I have got a course all about RodeCaster, and that is one of the reasons why I covered it, because, or one of the reasons why I made the course, I should say, is because this is one of the questions that comes up, is how to make all these adjustments. So first of all, understanding, dynamic audio processing, what is, what are all of these different functions that we've got, what are they actually affecting? So there is some theory in there of the basics of or foundations of dynamic audio processing, and then it goes into advanced audio processing. So talking about, what is a compressor. When you get into RødeCaster and you start looking at all the different settings, even if I just go into here, the noise gate, for example, we've got threshold, attack, hold, release, range, hysteresis. So what do all those different things mean? Well, that was part of the reason for making the course, was to sort of explain all those. So if you are watching and you have a RødeCaster and are mystified by some of those terms, then the RødeCaster Pro 2 Masterclass covers the Duo as well, really, because as I say, it's all the same processing. Then you can find a link to that down in the description. Over 100 lessons basically covering all of this advanced audio processing, as well as the routing and the basics and things like that as well. So that is the other thing that the RødeCaster gives you. So to answer your question, James, I don't know if that is answering it, but that would be why you might consider a RødeCaster if you were ever considering, changing or upgrading or side grading or whatever you want to call it. It's potentially going to be either the audio routing or maybe the audio processing. But again, I'm not sure with the RødeCaster exactly the capabilities of that, because I haven't tested it myself. But only change, obviously, if it's going to add some sort of value. So let me know if there are any other questions that you've got about the RødeCaster Pro 2 or the RodeCaster Duo. These things actually apply to the Streamer X as well, because the audio processing in particular is something that the Streamer X does. They have also got their... let me think of the name of it. The Rode software. It is their... I'm completely blanking on the name of it. It's not Rode Central. Rode Unify, that's the one. So Rode Central is the Rode app that you can use to control your RødeCaster. They've also got Rode Unify, which is essentially a software-based mixer. So you can actually use Unify in conjunction with the RodeCaster Pro 2 and the RodeCaster Duo if, those 3 channels are not quite enough and you want to have more fine control over levels of different applications that are feeding into the RodeCaster. You can actually use Unify with the RodeCaster as well, but it does specifically work with the Streamer X2. So that is... That is another one to consider. But personally, I still prefer, one of the things that I love about the Duo and the RodeCaster Pro 2 is just the tactile nature of, having the buttons and the slide faders just right there at your fingertips. And it was partly to get away from software that I was, looking to use one of these. So, that's just my view on that. Let's come back to here. I think you've just dropped another one in, so let's have a look. So quick share, I discovered some low-level noise and tracked it to my standard XLR cable being too close to... Oh, yeah, so this is another one. Whenever you're routing any cables, if you've got those XLR cables, then definitely be conscious about where they are, especially close to any power cables or data cables or anything like that. So that's definitely another one to check. Always, in fact, if you've got any sort of low-level noise or any interference or anything like that, it's a great point, Jamie, because it could be even just your headphone socket as well. Checking that and the headphone cable. Always check the cables. So that's often a sort of first port of call when it comes to diagnosing these things. So thanks for mentioning that. So if you've got any other questions about RodeCaster or RodeCaster Duo, as I say, the best place to ask them, you can always drop them in the comments down below in YouTube. I do try to keep on top of them, but it's a bit hard to keep on top of them all the time. But a better place to do that is always going to be in the Discord. So you can find that at takeonetech.io/family, and there's a channel dedicated to RodeCaster in there. So any questions you've got, you can drop them in there, and then I, or indeed people who know more than me about this topic, can also answer. That's the beauty of a community-based thing, is you get to share the answers with other people rather than just getting lost into YouTube. If there are any other questions though, before I drop off, let me know. If not, and what usually happens here is, because there's a sort of 10-second latency, 10-second delay between me broadcasting and it reaching YouTube and then the comments coming back, often I just end up finding I've dropped off just about a second before one pops into my stream. So giving it that amount of time to make sure nothing has come through, I will leave it there. Thanks for watching. Hope you've found this content useful. I'll leave a link when I get round to updating it to some other RodeCaster content there over on the right-hand side. Thanks so much for watching, and I will catch you next time.